Hello and welcome to the Commander's Quarters. I'm your host Mitch, glad to have you here. Here at the Commander's Quarters, we're all about Commander on a budget. Today we have an episode of Quest for Quarters. On episodes like these, I take you through underrated budget cards that you should be considering when you're building your decks. For these episodes, not only does every card have to be under $1, but they also need to be used in less than 4% of eligible decks on EDH Rec. This show and episodes like this one are possible because of viewers like you. So if you're looking for some easy ways to help support the show, make sure you like this episode and share it with friends. And make sure you subscribe to the channel and hit that bell notification icon so you don't miss any new episodes. You can also go check out our playmats and other merchandise at thecommandersquarters.com. Thank you to everyone who's already purchased our merchandise, it really does help support the channel. Another easy way to support this channel is by using our TCG Player affiliate links. So make sure that you're looking for those links in the description whenever you're buying a deck or just individual cards. And the final way that you can support this show is by supporting us directly by becoming a patron. There are many benefits to being a patron, and I truly couldn't do this without all of their support. Today's first underrated Quest for Quarters card is Twilights Call. Currently it's just 46 cents and sees play in less than 1,000 decks. It's a sorcery for 4 black, but you can cast it at any time you can cast an instant if you pay 2 more to cast it. It says each player returns all creature cards from their graveyard to the battlefield. There aren't too many mass reanimation effects in Magic. Now this effect will benefit everyone, but you can build your deck in a way that it's going to benefit you more. On top of that, having the option to cast this at instant speed can come in really handy. In fact, in the right situation, it can be a game-winning card that comes out of nowhere. Now there are some comparable cards to Twilights Call, so let's go over them now. The first that comes to mind is Patriarch's Bidding, which comes in at $19.21 and sees play in over 3,000 decks. It's a sorcery for 3 black, and it says each player chooses a creature type, each player returns all creature cards of a type chosen this way from their graveyard to the battlefield. So unlike Twilights Call, this won't get back every single creature from graveyards. So for a tribal-specific build, this can be a much better card. For example, if you're running a zombie deck with this in it, you can just choose zombie and get back every single one of your creatures. Your opponents, on the other hand, probably won't get back too many creatures unless they're running a tribal deck too. So this is more of a one-sided but more specific mass reanimation card. It fits perfectly in tribal decks, but not in many other places. And 2 other cards that are similar to Twilights Call are Living Death and Living End, which pretty much do the exact same thing. They each say each player exiles all creature cards from their graveyard, then sacrifices all creatures they control, then puts all the cards they exiled this way onto the battlefield. Now, Living Death sees a lot more play in Commander than Living End does, and for good reason. Living Death is a sorcery that has a cost of 3 black. Living End is also a sorcery, but it doesn't have a mana cost, but it does have Suspend 3 for 2 black. So unless you can cheat to cast Living End in another way, you're going to have to wait a couple turns for it to actually happen. Regardless, the effect that both of these have is extremely effective. They're essentially board wipes on top of mass reanimation spells. Now, Twilight's Call doesn't have that board wipe potential, but it does benefit you more than your opponents if you've got a stronger graveyard. It also can be cast at instant speed and come out of nowhere, and it's by far the most affordable out of all these cards. Again, mass reanimation isn't something that's too common in Magic. I believe that Twilight's Call is mostly overlooked because it's a symmetrical effect and many people don't want to worry about getting other people's best creatures back. But if your deck is built to take the most advantage of it, it can be huge for you. So let's go through some decks where Twilight's Call could fit right into. Perhaps the best fit for this is Iname Death Aspect. It has when it enters the battlefield, you can search your library for any number of spirit cards and put them into your graveyard. If you do, shuffle your library. So in combination with this, you can get every single one of your spirits into play. You can also use a commander that revolves around a mill strategy like Sidisi Brood Tyrant. By milling creatures into your graveyard, you're going to get zombie tokens as well as having more creatures to get with Twilight's Call. Another mill strategy that this can work really well in is Sir Conrad the Grim. It says whenever another creature dies or a creature card is put into a graveyard from anywhere other than the battlefield or a creature card leaves your graveyard, Sir Conrad the Grim deals 1 damage to each opponent. So the more creatures that are in your graveyard, the bigger the effect that this has and the more damage it does. Again, it may be a symmetrical effect, but if you build your deck correctly, you can get the most out of Twilight's Call. But now it's time for us to move on to our second Quest for Quarters card of the day with Psychic Possession. Currently it's only 51 cents and sees play in just over 300 decks. It's an enchantment aura for 2 blue, and it says enchant opponent, skip your draw step, whatever enchanted opponent draws a card, you may draw a card. There is a downside to this card, but in my opinion that downside is very small. Skipping your draw step though is no big deal, especially with the payoff that this card has. If you're going up against an opponent that has a deck that draws a lot of cards, this can provide you an incredible amount of value. If one of your opponents plays Ristic Study and you enchant them with Psychic Possession, congratulations, you're drawing just as many cards as they are. The more card advantage that opponent generates, the more you do as well. So while they might be getting ahead of the other opponents, they can't get ahead of you. Now this is a very unique effect, but there are some similar cards out there to compare this to. The first is going to be Mind's Eye, which comes in at $3.16 and sees play in over 8,000 decks. It's an artifact that costs 5 and it says whenever an opponent draws a card, you may pay 1. If you do, draw a card. So this applies to each and every single opponent, not just to one specific one that you enchant. The major difference is that you actually have to pay for those draws. This means that you're going to be spending and holding up mana that you otherwise could have used elsewhere. Another somewhat similar card is Consecrated Sphinx. It's nearly $15 and sees play in over 13,000 decks. It says whenever an opponent draws a card, you may draw 2 cards. So this card is much more effective than Psychic Possession, but it's also much more fragile. It commands that price of nearly $15 because of how powerful an effect that is, but because this effect is on a creature, it can be taken out a lot more easily. From personal experience, I haven't seen Consecrated Sphinx live for very long in most games. One final somewhat similar card is Notion Thief. Currently it's just under $1 and sees play in 8,200 decks. It has flash, and if an opponent would draw a card except for the first one they draw in each of their draw steps, instead that player skips that draw and you draw a card. So essentially, if an opponent's going to draw extra cards, you get to draw those instead. Now, because this has flash, it can come out of nowhere and steal an opponent's draws once, but usually after that, it's going to be dealt with before you get any extra cards from it. Now, Psychic Possession can be an effective card in a lot of decks, especially for in a draw-heavy meta. But let's look at some specific decks where this is going to be a good fit. First up, there's a Locust God, which just wants to draw a ton of cards, and because of that, you're going to be running a lot of wheels in that deck. And when you wheel with Psychic Possession in play, you're essentially doubling up the number of cards that you draw. Next up, there's a political control commander like Feldergriff. By paying blue, you can bounce it back to your hand and target opponent may draw a card. By making some deals with one of your opponents, you can make sure that each of you are drawing a good amount of cards. And even a commander like Taigam Sidisi's hand can be a fantastic spot for Psychic Possession. With Taigam, you already have to skip your draw step, so that downside of Psychic Possession is already mitigated. Psychic Possession is a fantastic card and can really even the playing field against an opponent that wants to draw a ton of cards. But now it's time for us to move on to our next underrated Quest Recorder's card today with Goblin War Drums. Currently it's just 22 cents and sees play in 1,600 decks. It's an enchantment for 2 and a red, and it says creatures you control have menace. So this means that your creatures can't be blocked except by 2 or more creatures. Now that doesn't make your creatures unblockable, but it makes defending against you a lot tougher. In my opinion, menace is a very underrated evasive ability. Even on an even playing field where everyone has the same number of creatures, they're not going to be able to block every single one of yours. On top of that, the blocks that they do have to make can be pretty awkward. Having to block a 1/1 token with 2 big creatures is overkill, but it's the only way to stop them. Menace can turn a disadvantageous board state into a very advantageous one. Menace can help you out in a variety of ways, but let's go through some similar cards that can illustrate this. First up, there's Grow War Chant, which is just 10 cents and sees play over 1,400 decks. On top of giving your attacking creatures menace, it also gives them +1/+0. Now this card does cost 1 more, and it can't fit in as many decks because it also has green in it. But with this, because of menace, it allows you to be a lot more aggressive with your attacks. Another somewhat similar card is Dolmen Gate. It's currently $8.82 and sees play in 1,300 decks. It's an artifact for 2, and it says prevent all combat damage that we dealt to attacking creatures you control. Now this comparison might be somewhat of a stretch, but bear with me. Essentially, this card is used to protect your creatures during combat. Menace plays a similar role. All your creatures aren't going to be protected, but some will. Menace makes it nearly impossible for your opponents to block every single one of your creatures. And if an opponent just has 1 creature, it doesn't matter how powerful that 1 creature is, it can't block any of your creatures at all. And in that way, Goblin War Drums is like Archetype of Imagination. Essentially gives all your creatures flying and takes flying away from all your creatures your opponents control. So the only way that your creatures are going to be blocked is with reach. Now this will be more effective and get your creatures through more of the time. But it's also a creature, so it's a lot easier to remove. Now, Goblin War Drums definitely doesn't fit in every single deck, but let's take a look at some commanders that it might be a good fit in. First up, there's Grenzo Havoc Raiser, which just wants to get creatures through and deal damage. And on top of that, when you do get through, you can goad your opponent's creatures to get more creatures through the next time around. And then there's Valdek Keeper of the Flame, which is going to create a ton of 3/1 elementals. And forcing your opponents to dedicate 2 creatures to block 1 elemental is huge. Goblin War Drums even fits really well in an Ilharg deck too. First off, it can protect and help Ilharg get through, and on top of that, it can help the creature that it's bringing in too. Again, in my opinion, Menace is a very underrated evasive ability. Goblin War Drums is sufficiently costed, and it's an enchantment, so it's hard for opponents to deal with. And now let's move on to our final Quest Recorder's card of the day with Loreseeker Stone. Currently it's only 10 cents and sees play in just 1,000 decks. It's an artifact that costs 6, and it says, pay 3, tap to draw 3 cards. This ability costs 1 more to activate for each card in your hand. There are some colors that really struggle when it comes to card draw. Colors like blue, black, and even green usually don't have a problem at all. But red, white, and colorless decks can use all the help that they can get. There might be a steep investment for this card up front, but after that, it's very efficient at drawing cards. 3 mana for 3 cards is a great deal. Now this does cost 1 more to activate for each card that you have in your hand. But most of the time you're not going to be looking to activate this when you've got a lot of cards in your hand already. Again, it might not be the most efficient card, but there are certain colors that desperately want this kind of effect. So let's take a look at some similar cards to compare this to. First up, there's Tower of Fortunes, which is not used in a lot of decks and for good reason. It only costs 4, but it costs 8 to tap to draw 4 cards. 8 mana for 4 cards is a very steep cost, especially when you compare it for 3 mana for 3 cards. Next up, there's Staff of Nim, which is used in over 9,600 decks. It says at the beginning of your upkeep, draw a card. So each upkeep you are getting 1 extra card for free. Now while you don't have to pay for it, you do have to wait for it. So in most circumstances, I'd rather have the effect where I can pay for 3 cards at once rather than wait for 1 each turn. Another similar effect actually comes from a blue card with Arcanus the Omnipotent. Currently it's just under $1 and sees play in over 8,300 decks. It also has a converted mana cost of 6, and you can tap it to draw 3 cards. While this effect is free, it's a lot more easy to remove since it is a creature though. And on top of that, since this is a blue card, it only fits in blue decks. Loreseeker Stone can fit in any deck, especially the ones that don't have access to good card draw. It does have a variable cost for its effect, but most of the time it's only going to cost 3, 4, or even 5 mana to draw 3 cards. But now let's take a look at those decks where this might be a good fit. First up, a colorless deck like Emrakul the Promised End is a perfect place for it. I actually just did a deck tech on this one, and believe me, this deck is not short on ramp. You'll definitely have the mana to cast and activate Loreseeker Stone as many times as you need to. Another deck where this can come in huge is Daretti Scrap Savant. Red decks aren't the best at drawing cards, and Daretti is especially good with artifacts too. And then there's Malfegor, which is a deck that can work to get rid of its hand. And again, when you're hellbent, it only costs 3 mana to get some of those cards back. Loreseeker Stone is definitely not for every deck, but it definitely gives decks an option that are desperate for card draw. And if you haven't seen my last Quest for Quarters episode, make sure you check it out here. But now it's time for me to hear from you. So in the comments below, let me know what your personal favorite underrated card is. And make sure that you're following us on social media for more updates and sneak peeks on future episodes. Links to our social media accounts can be found in the description. Also in the description below is a link to the Commander's Quarters Patreon page, and I just want to say a quick thank you to the patrons who have subscribed so far. There are many benefits to being a patron for the Commander's Quarters, including being able to vote on future Commanders for deck techs. There's even a general level tier where you get your own personalized deck tech dedicated to you. I truly couldn't do this without all of your support, so from the bottom of my heart, thank you. If you haven't already, make sure that you like and subscribe to the channel. Here at the Commander's Quarters, we're all about budget Commander. So while you're at it, go ahead and check out some of our other types of episodes. And with that, I'm out of here. Thanks again, and have a good one.